Thank you. Good afternoon. I know it's been a long day. Let's see if I can technologically steer my way through this. Okay. So first of all, I'd like to get to know a little bit about you. How many of you have fibromyalgia? Okay, so I'm not in the wrong place. How many of you have chronic fatigue syndrome? How many of you have both? Okay. How many of you are supporters of people with these illnesses? I think you deserve a round of applause, because without you, we wouldn't be here. For those of you that know me, I have been on quite a journey. When I hear myself being introduced, I sometimes think, I remember laying in bed and thinking my life was over. I really felt that there was nothing that I was ever going to be able to do that was going to make a difference. And I want to share with you a little bit about my journey, a little bit about the organization's journey, and today I want to share with you information that, if I could do cartwheels, I'd do cartwheels across the front here, because I really honestly believe that today things are changing. That today, I mean May 5th, 2007, things are changing that are going to affect every single one of you. It's going to touch your life. And I have spent the last, I think 6 days, kind of lost track of time, in Bethesda, Maryland, and at the American Pain Society conference and at NIH, and have found out a whole lot of exciting new things that I'm going to share with you today as well. I also want to share with you a little bit of information about what we as an organization have been doing and how you as individuals can get involved in some of the things that we are doing that is going to change the future. And my presentation is called The Patient's Role in the Treatment of Fibromyalgia, because I'm going to share with you things that you can do personally for yourself, things that you can do as an advocate, and things that the patient community as a whole are doing to be able to help people with fibromyalgia. So we as patients, a lot of different areas where we can become involved and help ourselves and help the community as a whole. One of the things that I think is so amazing is that we know that fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome affect millions of people. Today, I have been approved to say that fibromyalgia affects between 6 and 10 million people. I know that there have been a lot of questions about how many people have chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia, but we officially, from the FDA, was given permission to say 6 to 10 million people, and that's a lot of people. But the other thing that's very interesting is this is not something that is just affecting people in the United States. We think approximately 4% of the world's population has fibromyalgia. And one of the things that I'm going to share with you today is how fibromyalgia is becoming a global health issue and what is happening to help people in other countries learn more about fibromyalgia, how to live better with it, how their researchers can help us to understand this illness better. So if you add up all the people in the United States that have multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, breast cancer, and Crohn's disease, that doesn't even come close to the number of people with fibromyalgia. And the thing that amazes me is that last week, Thursday, the Wall Street Journal did an article in the newspaper, and they referred to fibromyalgia as a mysterious illness and a controversial illness. Now, each one of you could talk to that reporter and say, how controversial can my pain and my fatigue be? I feel this every single day. What are you debating? We have this illness. Would you talk to someone with cancer and debate their pain? Would you talk to someone with depression and say, you know, you don't have this? Of course not. And so what our future effort is going to be to continue to give legitimacy to this illness Because people have to understand you can't just negate 10 million people in the United States and say, we don't understand this, we're not going to pay attention. So each one of us has a responsibility to share your story with others and let people know what you are feeling is very real and what you are feeling deserves people's attention. When I started the organization, the National Fibromyalgia Association, 10 years ago, and I would walk up to someone and I would say, you know, I have this organization for people with fibromyalgia, this blank look would come over their face. How many of you have experienced that blank look? But as time has gone on, people now kind of get a little, you know, crease in their corner of their eye. Oh, I've heard of that. That's that illness, tell me about it. And today, when I tell people that I have fibromyalgia, they say, you know, my uncle has that, or my best friend has that, or my neighbor has that. Finally, people are starting to realize that everyone is going to know someone with fibromyalgia because it's so widespread. And as people start to personalize this, as they start to know people, and as they start to see how it turns people's lives upside down, as the senator said this morning, he had a staff person who struggled to get to work every day and to be able to deal with this. And I know that that person's experience had an effect on him and has changed him in understanding this and wanting to help us. So as more and more people get to know the person next door or the family member with this, hopefully they too will then be interested in taking on the understanding and the commitment to making people aware. So being diagnosed with fibromyalgia, another thing that happened in the past was a lot of people didn't want to give this a name. And we know that fibromyalgia, as each one of us knows as we talk to one another, can affect people differently, just like chronic fatigue syndrome can. And probably what we are going to end up finding out is that there are subsets of this illness, that different things work for different people have different triggers. There's probably going to be a lot of research that is going to give us new insights as to why you and the person sitting next to you may have a very different experience with these illnesses. But I still think it's so important because I know when someone finally said, you have fibromyalgia, I finally knew that there was something there that meant that I wasn't making this up, and that there was a group of researchers who were working on researching it. There were a group of doctors who were trying to learn how to treat it. And I also knew that I had something that I wasn't going to die from, that was going to be challenging, but then I knew I now can start to understand what it is that I have to face and what it is I have to do to live with this. And that helped. That helped a lot. But as you know, the diagnostic criteria, as our previous speakers were explaining, they're not cut and dry. We don't have a blood test yet. But if you think about it, we don't have a blood test for migraine headaches. We don't have a blood test for depression. Even illnesses like lupus and MS, they're not definitive diagnoses. So I believe very strongly in the fact that using the diagnostic criteria that we have right now may not be the best, but at least it can help us to identify the fact that we have this illness and that we know then what we're dealing with, and that in the future, hopefully, there will be some type of marker and a blood test or a x-ray or something that we would be able to do that would be able to diagnose this. But in the meantime, you cannot say that this illness doesn't exist just because there isn't a biomarker. The one thing I did in the beginning, and I bet all of you did this too, good old Dr. Ross, you know, he's the doctor that waved the magic wand, and all of his patients were wonderfully healed and went on their merry way. In reality, there isn't a Dr. Ross. There's some wonderful, incredible doctors out there, but there isn't a magic wand. And this does mean that each one of you has to take responsibility and has to play a role in your treatment process. And this is difficult when you're exhausted and you're not feeling good. You want to go in and you want to have a doctor give you something that's magically going to make you better. or is magically going to take this away. And right now what we have to do is we have to work on the concept of the journey and taking things slowly and surely and moving forward in your quality of life, because that magic wand doesn't exist. And if you keep searching for it, you'll be disappointed. But if you understand that you can get better, you can get better, even with some of the simple things that we know of today, that will give you the hope to be able to get up every day and do those things and slowly but surely improve your quality of life. When you feel that you have to give the responsibility of your health to someone else, it was mentioned that I went to see 37 doctors. I kept trying to find that doctor with the magic wand. And I also kept trying to find the doctor that didn't tell me I was crazy, or told me that I was just stressed out, or that I was just a woman that, didn't know how to deal with normal pain. That I had to take control back, that I had to realize that what I was experiencing was real, and that I could have control, and that I didn't need to give that control up to a doctor to tell me what was happening. I had to believe in myself. I had to listen to my intuition. How many of you have that little voice inside of you that tells you things that you know are true, and someone else may say such and such and such and such, and you go, that voice inside of me is telling me that this is what's true. You have to listen to that voice. And you have to stop and listen to that voice, because sometimes we get so involved in everything, we forget to listen to ourselves. And we forget to take an assessment of what we're feeling and what is happening. And it's very important that you pay attention to what is happening in your heart, in your soul, in your body, in your mind. So the definition of a journey: to travel over or through, to move along a particular course, passing from one state to another regarded as more advanced, or passage through a significant experience. When I was looking at these, I started to really think how interesting this was, because what it really talks about is moving from one place to another place, gaining knowledge, gaining information, gaining or having an experience that puts you in a better place. Now, that might not necessarily mean going from being a person that's ill to being a person who is cured. But it does mean moving through your life from being a person who maybe feels like a victim, like, why did this happen to me? What did I do wrong? What was the reason that this happened to me? To going to a place where you realize you did nothing wrong, you've done absolutely nothing wrong, and that on this journey you are going to learn not only the things that are going to help make you feel better, but maybe even will help you to be a better person. I think I'm much more compassionate. I think I'm much more sensitive. I think I'm much more aware. I think that there are all sorts of things that have made me a better person because of having this illness. Now, I'm not saying I wish this on anybody, and I'm not saying I would want to go back and go through what I've gone through. But what I am saying is, if you can look at the glass as being half full instead of half empty, and look for the things that can become a positive out of this, that in the long run it will make you a better person and a happier person. Each one of us is different. We look different. We may express to our doctor what's more important. Some of us may say pain is what really makes things difficult for us. Others may say fatigue is what really makes things difficult for us. But each one of us has a specific experience that is special to you. And that is what you need to look at and understand. So if for you, being in heat makes your symptoms worse, then you need to not be in the heat. If you're a person who goes to the cold weather and all of a sudden you're in the middle of a flare, then that's what you need to do. And I know so many people are looking for the answer. I'll have people call me up and say, I heard that if, I live in Chicago, and if I move to Arizona, I'm going to get all better, because people who live in hotter weather That's what's really going to make a difference. And I said, well, on warm days, do you feel better? I don't really think so. Well, think about it. Does that make sense then for you to pick up and move because someone else said they felt better in a warm climate? Be realistic. Listen to yourself and listen to and take notes. Jot things down. When you recognize something that you have done, jot it down. Now, of course, with this illness, it's not always going to be one thing after the other, because one day you'll say, gee, I noticed that every time I eat spinach, I get a really bad headache. So you'll stop eating spinach, and then one day something will come up and you'll eat spinach and you get no headache at all, and you go, okay, there goes that hypothesis. Because we do differ day to day. So don't get caught up in trying to figure things out. But the things that are constant and common in your life that you can recognize and say, I know that when I sit in a room like you are doing, that tomorrow I am going to be exhausted. And some days it's very much worth that because of the information and the help I'm going to get. And some days it's not. So those are the things you have to make up your mind about. We're all in the same boat. I love this picture. I just thought, we're all different, but we're all in the same boat, and we have to help each other. I know in the fibromyalgia community, there have been times where we haven't always been real nice to one another. There's been competitions, there's been, just things that, I know the answer, or this person doesn't have any idea. We're all in the same boat. And we are at a point where we have to work together. We have to help one another. We have to be understanding. We may not always agree, but we have to work together to be able to find a way to let people know about this and to find the treatments that are going to make a difference in our life. So what do you need to know? The thing that's exciting, or may also be a little bit difficult, is that things are changing every day now. I, over this past week, met with 5 or 6 doctors, and each one of them came to me and said, I think I'm onto something. One doctor, I really think dopamine is the issue here. And another doctor, I really think cervical stenosis is going to be what's happening here. And another doctor talking about the central nervous system and heart rate variability. There's a lot of hypotheses, a lot of ideas out there. And right now, I don't think we have the exact answer. I think we do know that fibromyalgia is not a rheumatological illness. It is a neurological illness. It is pain amplification in the central nervous system. So we do know that. But what is the exact cause? And we're putting those puzzle pieces together. And that's what's really exciting. But if you go to one doctor who is aware of some of these things, they may give you some of the newer treatment options, but they may not. And so one of the things that you can do is to talk to your doctor and share with your doctor information. Now, don't walk in with a basket full or a briefcase full of information and say, here, doc, I know all of these things, you need to know this. But if you do find something that seems to fit what you have been experiencing, you might want to share that with your doctor. And I would hope that all of you have doctors who would be interested enough in wanting to learn more. And one of the things that we are doing as a national organization is trying to help educate doctors and bringing other medical professionals who are experts in this field together to be able to share information. But what is most important is that you find a healthcare professional who will listen to you, who will have expectations of you so that you as a patient will also take responsibility, and that you can talk together about your experiences. For example, you don't want to go to a healthcare provider that doesn't believe in certain treatments or certain things that you're doing. I've had people come up to me and say, I didn't tell my doctor that I'm taking these supplements because he doesn't believe in supplements. Well, that's very dangerous, because if he or she gives you medication that could interact with those supplements, you could have a very, very serious reaction. So you need to find a healthcare provider that you can talk to, that you can be honest with, and you can be open with, and that they'll listen to you and they'll respond to you. Now, if this hasn't been the case, one of the things is that there are a lot of really good organizations that have information about doctors. And maybe you personally would rather go to a healthcare provider who has more of a complementary or alternative type of approach. You may want to see a doctor who is very compassionate and understanding, or you may want a doctor who's just, direct and goes in and says, this is what we're going to try, and listens to your information and says, okay, let's try this. But you need to make sure that you are going to someone you feel comfortable with. How many of you have been with a doctor that when you walked out, you felt this person didn't understand me, this person wasn't helpful? That's really scary. But how many of you have had a good experience with a healthcare provider? See, and that's wonderful, because there are. And what you need to do is move from that bad experience to the good experience. I recently had the mayor of one of the cities in Southern California come over to my office to have lunch with me. And she was running, and I had just learned that she had fibromyalgia, and she walked into our office and she sat down and she looked at me and she burst into tears. And she said, "You understand what I'm going through. I can't believe it. I have been for 10 years running and trying to run faster than fibromyalgia. And I can't run faster anymore. I don't know what to do." And I said, you have to take you have to give yourself permission to say, I have this illness and I need to do something about it. She left my office. She said, I'm too sick to go to lunch. And I said, no problem, absolutely no problem. She got in her car. She drove to City Hall. She had a big meeting that night. She called me up 10 minutes later and she said, I just put a message on my answering machine that I'm taking 3 weeks vacation and that I'm not available. And she said, I'm going home and I'm going to call some of the doctors that you had mentioned to me, and I'm going to find the one that I think is going to be the right one for me, and I'm going to start concentrating on me. And I thought, all this woman needed was permission to be able to take care of herself. It's sad that we feel we have to have permission. You have to be able to give it to yourself. You have to be able to say, I'm important. I deserve to have the time and the attention to take care of my illness. And this is something that each one of you has to give yourself permission to do. Or you can all come to my office and I'll give you permission there. Find what works for you. Some people distraction works, some people the positive attitude works, some people exercise works, some people talking works. My husband and I used to, he says, when we got fibromyalgia, we used to do a lot of talking. And that helped because he always came up with something positive at the end of our conversation that would make me feel like, okay, I could keep going. Remember, you are only a patient when you are in the doctor's office, that you are a person with fibromyalgia the rest of the time. So even saying if you're in the doctor's office in their waiting room, which may be more hours than 24 hours, but that you are only a patient for part of the time when you are there at your doctor's office. The rest of the time, you're a person. Because if you think of yourself as a patient all the time, that means you are a person who is constantly focused on your illness. And I'm not saying your illness is going to disappear, but what I am saying is that if you focus on it constantly, you won't have any other things in your life. And each one of you has value. Each one of you has other things in your life that make you who you are. I've also had people say, I'm not the same person anymore. I don't, I'm not making $30,000, $40,000 a year anymore. I'm not a nurse anymore. I am not a school teacher anymore. I am not the mother I used to be. I'm not the wife I used to be. And what I say to them is, do you have the same heart and soul? Are you still a good person? Are you still a person who loves those children, who loves that husband, who wants to do something eventually. Maybe you're the person now that, calls people up and shares with them information about what's happening at your kid's school. Maybe that's more important than whatever it was that you were doing before. But you are the same person. You've changed only in the fact that you now are a person with fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue syndrome. Remember, you still have value. Remember, you are the same person. Choose to live your life forward. How many of you have sat there and said, well, 10 years ago, I could walk a mile, and 10 years ago, I could, multitask, and 10 years ago, I could do this, and 5 years ago, I could do this, and all of these things, thinking about the past. You have to focus forward. You have to say, yesterday, I walked to the mailbox and back. That was better than 4 weeks ago. Things change, things are dynamic, but you have to focus on the positive in the future and look forward. And change isn't bad. I know we hang on to things. We want to hold on to certain things. But think about the change of the seasons. That's a wonderful thing. They're very different. They give us an opportunity to experience different things and have different emotions and holidays and lifestyles that come out of that. So when you think about change being bad, think about the seasons and how when there is change, it's a positive, it's an important thing. Take things one day at a time. If you start thinking about how am I going to do this 6 months from now, or how am I going to do this even a week from now, it'll become overwhelming. Take it a day at a time. Once I heard a story about having a certain number of marbles. Every morning you wake up and you have a certain number of marbles. And you say, okay, I'm going to spend all my marbles today on going to the offer conference. And you take all those marbles and all of that energy that is represented in those marbles went to coming here today. And today you probably wouldn't be able to go and do your walk to the park and back, or maybe, help your child with their homework or something, because you used those marbles, those things that represent the energy that you have to do this. And each day you have to decide how you are going to spend your marbles, or else you will lose your marbles. So remember to take it one day at a time. Small things can make a big difference. This sounds very silly, but I'd like each of you to just kind of get comfortable in your chair. I don't see any movement. Okay. Get comfortable in your chair. That's an impossible impossible task maybe. Okay, I'd like you to put your hands just in your lap. I'd like you to close your eyes. And I'd like you to just breathe in and breathe out. And I'd like you to think of your very favorite color. And as that spot of color is right there in front of you, I want you to think of it as growing. That beautiful color that brings you happiness. And I want you to think now of a blanket that's made of that color. And it's soft and it's cool. And as it wraps around you, it comforts you. And when this beautiful colored blanket is around you, you feel no pain and you feel no worry. I want you to breathe and just think of a place that brings you happiness. It might be a place that you've been to recently. It might be a place that was from your childhood. But this is a place that's in your mind that makes you happy. I want you to breathe and just enjoy that feeling of happiness. And now, as you slowly open your eyes, I want you to always remember that you can go to that place anytime you want. You can take those good memories, you can take that protective, beautiful colored blanket and surround yourself with it. Can you breathe in? So I want to see you breathe and breathe out. Do you feel just a little better? Does it help just a little bit to know that you can take time for yourself and that you can go someplace where it will help you to feel better? Try that. Try that any time where you're not feeling like you can handle what's happening to you. Little things can make a big difference. So what are those questions that each one of you always asks? Am I going crazy? Do others feel like I do? Will I ever feel better? If I keep trying to explain to my family what it feels like, will they finally understand? And my doctor told me there is nothing that they can do to help fibromyalgia. Is this true? No. Yes, yes, maybe. No. No, you are not crazy. I think we have figured this out finally, and maybe we will even get to a point where we won't have to bring this topic up anymore. But for some reason, we still seem to try to have to remind ourselves that this is not a psychological illness. You are not crazy. You have a physical illness that is causing you pain and fatigue. And yes, other people experience what you feel. One of the things that we do at the NFA every single day is talk to people on the phone and say, you're not alone. What you're feeling is felt by a lot of other people. Will you feel better? I said this earlier and I want to stress it. You will feel better. The future is bright. We are learning new things. And even with these small things that I've shared with you so far today, those things can make a difference. Try new ways to talk to your family. This is one of the hardest things, and I said maybe your family will understand. Those of you that have your family here or friends here with you, you are very fortunate because you know how important that is to your well-being. But try not to tell them in a way that's complaining or is frustrated. Try to share with them what you're experiencing by making them understand the experience. For example, last time you had the flu, remember how miserable you felt? That's how I feel today. And so instead of us, doing all the yard work, could we today just sit in and watch a movie together and then talk about it? There's different things that you can do to try to help without saying, I hurt, I'm miserable, you have to understand, kicking and screaming and shouting. Oftentimes, something subtle will get other people to understand what you're experiencing. And yes, you may feel a lack of support. I lost many of my friends, but you'll find who your true friends are, and you'll find that you can learn to let go of those friendships that maybe weren't important. So what are the treatments that are most helpful? And this is something that is really exciting because we're starting to have new treatments. And one of the things that I wanted to share with you today is some of the new treatment options that are starting to be discussed. I'm going to skip forward here because we're running out of time. So these are all the things we've talked about. Lifestyle changes, work on sleep hygiene, include physical activity, interact with friends and family, feed your soul. This is an important one. Feed your soul. That's something very simple to do. Listen to music, play with your dog, see a picture of your favorite grandchild. Those things are important. Pace and space. Someone once said to me, what is that? Is that like a dance step or something? Is that something on Dancing with the Stars? Pacing and spacing. Knowing when you can do something, spacing things out, and not pushing yourself past that wall. How many of you have hit the wall at times? And how many of you have been going along and you go, I see the wall, and you run head first right into that wall. And then you go, why did I do that? I do that so often. I mean, I'll sit there and I'll say, okay, I'm done for the day. And then I turn my computer on and I start typing and I'm going, okay, that wall, it's just coming closer and closer. And I hit it and then I think, okay, now tomorrow I'm not going to be able to do the things I wanted to do. Let's avoid running head first into the wall. I said we weren't crazy, but sometimes we do some crazy things. Learn the power of positive thinking. This is one when people used to say this to me, I used to get so mad. Well, if I could think this away, I would. But the power of positive thinking is so important because actually what you think physiologically affects you. Studies have now shown, and we had examples of that today in the research that was shown. You're in a stressful situation, your chemistry, your hormonal chemistry changes. We know that people can actually have things happen in their brain that change just by what they're thinking. Not even by the fact that you have pain or the fact that you feel hot or cold, but just by what you're thinking. So it's so important that you think positively, that you try to remember to use those words that reinforce good things in your life. And don't forget your emotional health. This is something that, before I get into talking about the new treatments, a long time ago, people were very skeptical of people with fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome because they were told that this was psychological. And so many of us didn't want to have anything to do with anything psychological because we were afraid that that would then mean that this illness didn't have a real basis to it. Well, when you think about it, that's ridiculous because we have a mind-body connection. And if your life is turned upside down, I know all of your lives have been turned upside down, all of us could use help in dealing with that. A person who has cancer, a person who has diabetes, what do? They have counseling for them. They help them learn how to deal with the challenges they are going to have to live with. My best friend who lives in Germany recently had a transplant for cancer. And part of their system was that when she finally got out of the hospital, her insurance paid for her and her family to go to a spa for 4 weeks where they had counseling, they had massage, they had music therapy, they had doctors that helped monitor her medication. And I thought, what a concept. I mean, and there are places here that do that, but we have to pay a lot of money. So, but wouldn't it be wonderful if here we could have that type of concept where you have to take care of not only your physical self, but your mental self, and you also have to have your family be part of that counseling and that knowledge how to be able to deal with the new challenges. So anyone who says to me, I'm seeing a counselor, I'm seeing a psychologist, I'm seeing a psychiatrist, I think that's excellent because if you can help your emotional health heal while you're healing your body, you'll get there faster. I remember when a doctor first said to me, I'm going to give you an antidepressant. And I went, okay, here we go again. He thinks I'm crazy. And he looked at me and he said, you have to understand that we called these antidepressants because that's what these medications were first used for. But today we know that they have the capability to help with pain, reduce pain, to help with sleep. So I'm giving this to you to help you with your pain and your sleep. And I thought, you know, again, here was this stigma that was attached to this, and I wasn't going to even try this medication because at first I didn't understand. But when he explained to me that this was the reason why. And then as time went on, I started to think, well, a person that has depression, why do we have a stigma against them? They have a health problem, just like we have a health problem. And many of us do have overlap of depression or anxiety or fear. And these are very real illnesses. They're nothing to be embarrassed about. They're nothing to not seek help for. And I think it's important that, again, you give yourself permission to deal with those issues. A community of sharing and caring. Okay, this is where I now start doing cartwheels because things are changing and they're changing very, very quickly. Fibromyalgia is now being recognized as a global health issue. And as you look at who in the world has an influence or an impact on health issues, well, usually, such as AIDS and breast cancer and a lot of these things, it started with the patient community. And that's where chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia has started. It has started with us as patients saying, we're not going to take this anymore. You need to pay attention to us. You need to help us. And what happened from that point was that doctors and scientists started paying attention. And you have the healthcare providers who started saying, I want to help people with fibromyalgia. And you started to have the scientists who started to do the research. And then slowly but surely, you started having organizations and government agencies start to put funding, put money out there to be able to help fund research. And then finally, you started to have national and international organizations start to pay attention. And right now, there is an organization called OMERACT. And this is part of the World Health Organization. And it is the outcome measures for rheumatological illnesses. And all of those scientists that are involved with rheumatological illnesses, and even though fibromyalgia is probably not a rheumatological illness, this is where the study and the research and the doctors originally came from. They are now looking at trying to be able to understand the diversity within our population. So are there different things happening with each of us? Do some of us react differently to certain treatments? Where should the research go? How should we be able to further the research and get new people interested in fibromyalgia research and chronic fatigue syndrome research? And we now have national organizations that have this on their agenda, that have said this is something that is important. And as that happens, you have more and more people becoming interested in putting money out there available to find the answers. And about 5 years ago, I started to hear that there were some pharmaceutical companies who started to think that they might be interested in looking for treatments. And I thought, gee, that would be nice, but how long is this going to take and what is this going to mean? And I asked many of our medical professionals and they said, you know what this means? This means that people think that people with these illnesses are worth an investment. They're worth going out and trying to find answers and trying to find things. And we live in a society where money talks. There's nothing we can do about that. But when money is started to be put into the pipeline to deal with this illness, people pay attention. And what happened is that there were several companies that started getting interested and started doing clinical trials, and maybe even some of you have participated in some of the clinical trials, and they have found that there are some medications that have efficacy. Now, these aren't cures. It may work for you, it may not work for you, but it's a start. And last Thursday, the Wall Street Journal article, although it did say it was controversial, they did report that Pfizer has put in for FDA approval the first medication. It's called pregabalin, or it's marketed under the name Lyrica, which has been approved for neuropathic pain to be approved for fibromyalgia. Now, what does this mean? Well, first of all, it means there's going to be a lot of talk about fibromyalgia. Some good, some bad, because they're going to probably say, you know, this medication works real well or this medication doesn't work real well or whatever. But it's going to bring attention. It's going to provide a medication that when a doctor has a patient come in, instead of saying, I don't know what I can do for you, he can now say, you know, there's clinical trials and there's an FDA approval. There's a medication I actually can now give you for fibromyalgia. And gee, if all those people say that fibromyalgia exists, it must exist. It sounds kind of crazy, but that's the way it works. That's the way the healthcare providers are going to say, there's a medication, this really exists. Think about depression. Depression wasn't something that people really wanted to treat. It wasn't something people understood. But as soon as there were medications for it, depression became more acceptable. It became something that that doctors felt more comfortable in being able to treat. And as time went on, we got better and better medications. So that's what's happening right now, is that there are medications that are in the pipeline. And I can tell you that there's probably between 15 and 20 medications that are in the pipeline. And that means a lot of new science and research, a lot of awareness, a lot of opportunity for each one of you. But what's going to happen over the next few years is we are going to need help with clinical trials. And this is one way you can personally make a decision, if it makes sense for you, to be a part of those clinical trials. And if you go to our website, you can find the clinical trials that are in your area, and you might want to take part in that. So we are becoming a community of caring and sharing. Patient assistance and support. There are so many more wonderful organizations out there, and we're communicating and helping each other. We're expanding continuing medical education so more doctors will understand how to help each one of you. Awareness and outreach. This is the other exciting news. July, the National Fibromyalgia Association will be launching our first National Public Service Awareness campaign. So there will be television commercials, media broadcasts, and all sorts of information that is going to go out that is going to explain to people what fibromyalgia is and that it is real. So, yeah. We, on Monday, are going to be getting back the information from the market research team. We have 3 public service announcements that we have been testing, and we will be getting the information back, and we'll be going into production the 1st of June. And so, how many of you have seen the Restless Legs commercials on TV? I know many of you probably knew about Restless Legs before that, but not a whole lot of people did. Now, restless leg syndrome is something that almost everybody knows about. So our hope is, and these are going to be unbranded, what this will say is, talking about fibromyalgia, it will say talk to your doctor or visit, and it will be our website. So this is not going to be something that is branded with a pharmaceutical product. It's going to be information strictly on fibromyalgia. And so because of that, I think people are going to understand. We live in a strange place. Okay, if you have a medication, if you have a TV commercial, then it's real. You know, it doesn't matter what all of you have been telling everybody. So we will have a real illness very soon. Breaking down the barriers to treatment. I think this was something that I heard happened over at the physician conference, talking about new things. Controversial things, very controversial things. But we can now talk about these things and not feel like we have to, you know, hide behind closed doors, that we can bring up things that maybe people didn't understand or weren't willing to discuss in the past. And these are going to be things that are going to help us understand these illnesses. Research facilitation, I think there's going to be more funding. As I said, I knew there were 5 or 6 companies doing research for medications, but over the last week I found out it's more like 15 to 20. A lot of money is going to be spent on finding out how to find a better treatment for each one of you. Efforts of collaboration. One of the things that we're very involved in is creating what we are going to hopefully be calling an International Fibromyalgia Consortium. And this is bringing the patient advocacy groups, the individual doctors who are clinicians, the researchers, the regulatory agencies like the FDA, the National Institutes of Health, all of these different groups, the international groups, together to discuss what's going to be happening in the future. And how many of you have been a part of a think tank or a think group or even a brainstorming session, and you come together and you bring all these different attitudes and all these different ideas and you come up with solutions? And that is what I think is going to happen, is there's going to be more collaboration. And encouragement for a global awareness. We right now are in the process, we've been funded to do an international search of research. and patient organizations. And we are going to be hosting an event in August that I'll tell you a little bit more about, because maybe some of you even would be interested, that is going to bring patient support group leaders from all around the world together in Washington, D.C. And we're going to be sharing information on what's happening in our countries and what are the thoughts and attitudes and what are the things we're doing that we can help each other to be able to do more for the patient community. A dedication to making a difference. Our organization started with a laptop and me in my bed and my husband saying, "Go, Lynn, go." Today, actually Monday, I'm signing a contract for a 6,000 square foot office, which scares me to death. We have 15 staff people. We've just hired a medical consultant. We just hired the executive director, who has been for 14 years the executive director of the National Fibromyalgia Research Association, has now joined our organization. We are going to be able to do patient advocacy, patient assistance, continuing medical education. We're going to be able to do more of the media awareness. We hope to be able to get more involved with patient advocacy. The CFIDS community has done such an incredible job in this, and we in the fibromyalgia community need to learn from them as to how we can become a bigger voice in advocacy and research, and being able to get involved with all of these things in a collaborative way. And I'm so excited to have groups like OFFER that are now working so hard, and together, as I was saying, I hope we'll be able to support one another so that together we won't have to have such a burden of trying to duplicate efforts and continue to do things the hard way, that we'll be able to do things in a much easier way. I remember our first conference, and I look around here and I remember all of the volunteers at the end of the conference coming to me and saying, "I'll see you in a month." Because you work so hard. Now we have staff that are healthy people that we can say, "This is your responsibility." And we can save those volunteers to do things that aren't going to put their health in jeopardy. And we need to do that all over, everywhere. One thing I wanted to mention to you is this year for Fibromyalgia Awareness Day, we have a program. We have a new documentary called Living with Fibromyalgia, which has just been premiered about 2 months ago. We have kits that you can get where you get the video and you get all the information on how to show this in your community, how to get media coverage. We have 105 support groups that are going to be showing this video this upcoming weekend. And it's going to be in theaters, it's going to be in hospitals, it's going to be in homes. And it's a wonderful movie. It was done by 2 young people, Deneen, whose mother has fibromyalgia, and it talks about what is it like to live with this, and so that people that don't have it will have a better idea. When we've shown this, the people that are caregivers come out and go, "Oh my gosh, I never realized my mother was going through this, and I really want to be there for her." So if you have people that you would like to have better understand this illness, this is an excellent way to do it, is by getting this movie and even being able to share it with your support groups or your individual. Maybe it's at your church, or maybe it's at your gym, or maybe it's at your school, or wherever. There's all sorts of ways that you can share this information. This is what I was talking about, the NFA Leaders Against Pain Coalition. 2 years ago, we had scholarships, and we invited people to submit applications to get a scholarship. And we chose 45 support group leaders from around the country to come to a 3-day workshop in California. We paid for everything. And they came, and together they went through advocacy training, media training, leadership training, and support group exchanges. And this group of people went back to their hometown, and we had over 300 news articles that they generated after going through the media training. And their communities got to learn about fibromyalgia. Several of them were even on their local television news program. It was such a success that we duplicated it the next year when we did our FAME conference. We held a 1-day event, and we now have 125 trained support group leaders that are part of this coalition. This year, our program is going to be in conjunction with the International Myopain Society meeting. And this is the international group of doctors who do research on fibromyalgia. And the patients are going to have a scholarship to be able to go in Washington, D.C. and be a part of that 3-day research conference and then attend the support group leader training. And this is the conference that is going to have national support group leaders and international support group leaders. So far, we have people coming from Romania, from Italy, from Japan, from Australia. It's going to be an opportunity for us to learn from one another and to learn how you can go back to your community and share some of these tools. So I'm very excited about that. And you'll make friendships, these people make friendships that are lasting forever. I'm going to go over that. Okay. So what I want to do is quickly move through this and tell you about the clinical trials that are happening with these new medications. These are the 5 medications that are currently being considered in either third stage clinical trials or have, as I said, Lyrica has already gone to FDA for approval. Cymbalta is a medication that works on norepinephrine and serotonin. The second one I don't even know how to pronounce because I just learned about this medication, but it probably is fairly similar to Cymbalta. It's in the pipeline at Wyeth. Lyrica is a anti-seizure medication, which is used for neuropathic pain, which again is a very different type of medication. Milnacipran is a serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor. Say that fast, quickly, especially at the end of a presentation. And Xyrem is a medication for sleep. And Xyrem is one of those medications that is right now starting new clinical trials, and they are looking for people to be a part of this. And we will probably within the next week be putting up the clinical sites where Xyrem is going to be tested. So the thing that's interesting about this is that you have medications that work on pain, medications that work on sleep, medications that work on different types of pain. So all of these things are going to be looked at, evaluated, and possibly eventually called fibromyalgia medications. Clinical trials are also taking place in complementary and alternative areas. We have been doing exercise clinical trials. There are a lot of clinical trials that are looking at water therapy, acupuncture, a lot of these other areas. And again, these are up on our site, and if you look around your community, you may be able to find some of these clinical trials and participate in them. One of the things that I was really pleased about some of the previous speakers was the importance of what you have to say. What you say is going to help the doctors to understand this better. And I know over the last 6 months, I got the incredible opportunity to speak in front of 85 doctors at Pfizer, almost 120 doctors at Eli Lilly, and about 65 doctors at Wyeth. And all I did was tell them what it was like to have this illness, because they're in there doing research, but they don't always know what we're feeling and what it's like. And I'll tell you, one doctor came up to me afterwards and was crying and said, I can't believe that I'm in a position to be able to help people like you. And this is what is happening out there, is that the researchers are not just researching because it's exciting to do research, but they're researching because they're hearing what each one of us has to say. And I think it's so important that if you visit our website, we oftentimes have surveys, we oftentimes have questionnaires, we have ways that you can communicate, sitting in your own home, that we can take that information and share it with those people that are doing research. We just had an internet survey that was published. You can go to Biomed Central and type in the word fibromyalgia. We had 2,596 people complete a 45-minute survey in 3 days. Now that just tells us how much you care and how much you want people to know. And all of the results are in that paper. I was going to share some of them with you. But the thing that's really interesting is that what we have thought for a long time might not necessarily be true. And by each of you sharing what you feel will help us to have a better understanding of this illness. One of the things that I did want to let you know from this survey is that 31% spend more than $100 per month in seeing a healthcare provider. 47.3% of you spend more than $100 per month on prescription drugs. 22.57% spend more than $100 on over-the-counter products. And 27% spend more than $100 on alternative modalities. What this tells us is that this is a very expensive illness to have, and that without proper treatments, what you are doing is taking a stab in the dark. You're trying everything that you possibly can, and it's expensive. And it's costing society money, too. Each one of you is seeing a healthcare provider 4 to 12 times a year. You're going to an ER 1 to 4 times a year. All of these things cost a lot of money to the insurance companies and things like that. And what's going to happen is they are, with this information, realize that they have to do something that's going to change, because you can't keep having these expenses. We're breaking down the barriers. We talk about better understanding of fibromyalgia, new scientific community, increased public awareness. And I don't know how many of you have heard of the book called The Tipping Point. I just recently read it, and it's interesting because what it talks about is how a small number of people grow to increase and have a large number of people be aware of something. And I believe right now we are at that tipping point. We are at the point where things are going to change. And with everything that's going to be happening in the next 2 to 3 months, I really look forward to the next time I get to see you, and each one of you can say, that tipping point made a difference in my life. It's changed my ability to do this, this, and this. And I look forward to that opportunity, and I thank all of you for all of your time and listening today.